So when I was a teenager, one of the things is that my parents required that I have a summer job. And so I was earning, a couple $1,000s during the summer, when I was 13 years old. And then of course they said, well, you can't just like spend it all, you can have your comic book allowance, but then you have to put the rest into some sort of investment. And the one good thing they did is they said, you can choose whatever company you think is interesting and invest in that. And so early on, I put money into Apple because I had an Apple computer. This is like the mid-1990s, of course. And then being a bit of a nerd, I really loved buying books online, and there was this new company called Amazon.com. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just put some money into Amazon.
Hi, I'm Astghik Zakharyan, the co-founder of Startup Investor Accelerator. We are an angel investor training program currently based in Europe. Today we have our interview with Michael Burnett. Hi Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm great, how about you?
Very good. Thank you so much for making time for being here today. I would like to get started with your personal and professional background to understand what got you here.
Yeah, well, I got into the technology industry about 15 plus years ago. I had started out actually in a completely different industry in movies and television, but sort of learned that grass was greener and pay was better if I got into technology. So around 2009, 2010, I started to work in tech as a product designer. Spent the next 15 years kind of like gradually working at larger and later stage startups, specifically within product design mostly. And so for the last 10 years I've been leading teams in product design at typically scale up size companies, 100 to 250 sort of people. I always sort of like looked at the things that were wrong with the industry, ways to improve things. I always wanted to get into investing at some point in the future. This sort of like, arrived somewhat unexpectedly, but then I started to get into investing.
Yeah, so you were basically in the perfect place to start investing, seeing innovation happening right in front of your eyes and being part of that. So when you were thinking about getting into investing, what kind of investing were you thinking about? Was it angel investing, or did you start with, I don't know, something else?
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I've invested for my entire life in different, forms, stock market, even some, crypto and things like that. But when it came to investing in companies and startups, I never really anticipated that I'd be doing angel investing. I thought that maybe one day I would transition into venture capital. That was sort of a long-term goal. But I sort of realized that, I didn't need to wait that long to get into investing. And so once I learned a little bit more about angel investing, I started to, test those waters a few years ago.
Ah, well, we'll come back to your angel investing. Now, I want to understand, first investment, first time you thought, wow, investing would be cool. What was that like? And what did you start with? What was a first step into trying the environment?
Sure. Well, I can go back to the not just angel investing, but any investing.
Yeah.
All right. So when I was a teenager, one of the things is that my parents required that I have a summer job, and so I was earning a couple $1,000s during the summer, when I was 13 years old. And then of course they said, well, you can't just like spend it all. You can have your comic book allowance, but then you have to put the rest into some sort of investment. And the one good thing they did is they said, you can choose whatever company you think is interesting and invest in that. And so early on, I put money into Apple because I had an Apple computer. This is like the mid-1990s, of course. And then being a bit of a nerd, I really loved buying books online, and there was this new company called Amazon.com. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just put some money into Amazon. And so actually shortly after the Amazon IPO, I started putting all of my summer earnings in there. I probably altogether put maybe $10,000 into Amazon stock in the, year or two after the IPO. And that turned out to be pretty effective, especially, this was like the 90s .com boom. I think it tripled the stock market in general, but Amazon went up something like, something absurd, 100x or something like that. And so I think that over the course of 3 years, I ended up with about, maybe 100,000 earned off of Amazon stock. There's a sad ending to the story.
Oh, there's sad. Yeah. But that's crazy. A teenager, a 13-year-old kid investing, getting into the center of it and making real money, real returns from the investment, something the professionals are now dreaming about, catching the wave. So you caught the wave without really knowing or understanding much about the way
Yeah,
for
and I mean,
any
maybe
of
you
them.
don't need to be an expert. I mean, really, obviously,
Yeah.
I didn't have any expertise whatsoever. I was just looking at companies that I thought were interesting, and I mean, I think that's probably a good rule of thumb now as an investor as well, is just, find companies that you love and invest in those companies.
And that you believe in, you're the user and you understand what they are doing and why is it important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's different, what's new, why is this interesting? Yeah.
I'm super curious about the sad story. We'll come back to that maybe to see how did that end. So coming back to fast forward now, you're angel investing. So how did you think or participate in the first, like for the first time, how did you get into angel investing? What was your access point and like what did you start with?
Yeah. I was the co-founder, never the founder, but I was the co-founder of some very early stage startups in Silicon Valley. This is like 10, 15 years ago. And so I always had a taste for startups. And so in some cases, I didn't put money into those companies, but I did sort of see the very early stages, and I participated in a lot of the fundraising efforts of those companies. So a lot of times I was the one putting together pitch decks and so on. In some cases, meeting with investors, being part of those meetings. And so I always, sort of looked at this as a sort of like really exciting time for startup formation. And eventually, I got later in my career, had a little bit of like, expendable income. And I thought, well, now I want to start putting some money in. Very much started as sort of like friends and family level funding. So sometimes past colleagues and so on were starting their own company and they said like, hey, we're raising an angel fund right now. Do you want to put some money in? I did a couple times. Frankly, those didn't work out very well. I think that part of the learning experience from that is that you don't want to just sort of, put money into something at random just because somebody reaches out. Certainly knowing a founder and believing in them is a very important thing. But I do think that as an angel investor, you want to have a broader sense of like how you're comparing this company against that company. Exactly. As people say, the earliest round is friends, families, and fools, And so I was very much one of the fools, that was like, sure, yeah, why not? Here's $10,000, Not the best approach, I think taking a more methodical approach, making sure you're doing due diligence and so on, learning all the ins and outs of the business plan is very, very important. But I started to dabble, put money in at the friends and family stage. A little bit later, some former colleagues and friends were a little bit more organized. They had like little sort of like micro angel networks saying like, hey, we've got this group of 4 or 5 or 6 people who pool money together to put some into some promising startups. At those stages, those companies were a little bit further on. They were at least, post-product, if not post-revenue. But they, I collaborated with those groups a couple times, but those were the early stages. It was really just sort of like random deal flow happening my way. If somebody reached out and said like, hey, we're raising, but it was not, a professional approach to it.
Yeah, of course. So you had the open mind of investing in general from your background, and it just came organically from your network and around you. You're just in the right place where you kind of got pulled into the... Wow, I would really love to understand, moving forward from your first angel investing, you mentioned that like you thought that you would be maybe like doing angel investing much more in the future rather than sooner. So what was that thought? What kind of belief did you hold that kind of predicted you participating into investing more like further on your career versus early on and as an angel?
Well, I had a very like preconceived notion of like the steps of my career, and it was sort of like, be, early on in a startup, help that company scale up, have an exit, make a bunch of money, then be a founder myself, scale that company up, have another great exit, make even more money, right? And then once you don't have to worry about money anymore, then you can start being an investor. That's obviously a very unlikely path to actually happen. So I started to think about how would I do this a little bit more methodically, at this point in my career. And I think one of the eye-opening moments was realizing that, when you join an angel group, you can pool much smaller amounts of money. So you don't need to be writing, $100,000 checks. You don't even need to be writing, $25,000 checks. You can get started at 5 or 10,000. And that's even the best way to start because, there's a lot less, skin in the game, I guess. You're getting started with a reasonable amount of money. where if you lose it, because of course, many startups fail, and if you lose all of that, there's the potential of getting wiped out. But the key thing is having a broad portfolio, putting 5 or 10 or whatever your threshold is in many companies. And so that's why starting with the smaller amounts lets you spread what could have been my idea of one investment really into 10 or 20 investments. And I mean, in fact, I'm thinking of a more or less like arbitrary 7-year timeline, just because I'm thinking that by the time I'm 50, I would like to be able to have my own fund. But I'm thinking that the investments I do now, I want to see those returns in 3 to 5 to 6 years, and I want to by 7 years from now be able to demonstrate what my portfolio returns are. And of course, I hope I'll get better along the way. But I do want to see some of those returns coming back.
Coming back to when you were just getting started in angel investing, were you already living here, or was this back in States, or?
Yeah, so this was back in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, when I first started, but that was the sort of non-professional approach. I moved to Barcelona partly because I do think that this is a really exciting startup ecosystem, but still in the very early stages of that ecosystem. Silicon Valley obviously is extremely mature, potentially even too mature to be able to compete for good deal flow as a small-time angel investor. A lot of people complain that there's no good deals anymore. But I would say that Europe is I think very much up and coming and promising in terms of the startup ecosystems. Barcelona is very exciting just because so many people from all over Europe and all over the world move here. So it's an exciting time to be here in general, but I also think it's a great time for angel investing here.
Did you have any kind of challenges, or what kind of things do you need as an angel investor that perhaps you didn't have access to or didn't quite figure out yet here? Tell us a little bit more about your pre-SIA journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, knowing the community, building a big network is very important. You can't do it on your own. Well, you can do it on your own, but that's not the advised approach, really. So meeting other people who are startup founders, meeting people who are in the investment world, people who are also angel investors, that network is very, very important. And so really it was, only over the course of maybe 6 months or a year that I started to meet other people who were angel investing, who were startup founders, meeting people like you. And being able to become part of that community and just learn more from them. Yeah.
So what were you looking for? So that was primarily looking for a network when you came across to us, or what kind of value did you see in SIA and the Transatlantic Angel Conference program when you were just getting to know the program or considering joining?
Good question. Let me think about how best to answer that. So I really was, trying to build a network. It wasn't very specific to trying to find an angel network. I mean, there are other angel networks out there, of course. But once I started to learn more about SIA, about the Startup Investor Accelerator, I saw that it ticked a lot of the boxes of what I was looking for. It is, a very large community that has 15 years of history in the U.S., and so it's run by people who are very smart and know what they're doing. So getting that guidance was a key piece of it. Being able to tap into that existing investor community was a very important thing. But I also love a couple things about the program. One is the learn by doing approach. So you're diving in, you're getting to evaluate 70 or 80 different startups. Doing all of the process of meeting them repeatedly, hearing their pitches, getting into due diligence. All of those things are very key, and I think that methodology is very effective. But the other thing I love about it, which is great for us as investors, but not necessarily the friendliest environment for startups, is that it's kind of like this battle royale pitch competition. And so you see first 70 startups pitch, you hear them pitch, you get to vote and narrow it down to 24. And what's remarkable is that because really even at that level of 24 startups out of 75, you're dealing with the top 1/3. They're all legitimate, very promising startups. They all have a good shot at success, but you get to compare them against each other, and I would say that maybe there's a bit of an art and a science to comparing apples to oranges when you're looking at a med tech against an insurtech or something like that. But it is great. It is great to be able to compare startups against each other and see, well, do I want to put my money into this one or this one?
So which one would you call as the key skill or methodology that you built? Was that the highlight for you, or are there other things that you gained that change your perspective or change the way you're doing angel investing nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I think the methodology, I think one of the most important ones, which the program teaches, is building your own investment thesis. I didn't have really a clue of what my investment thesis, was before this. It really was during the program that I started to think that I wanted to not just take a methodical approach to angel investing, but actually approach angel investing as a sort of semi-pro, still a side gig, but it's still something that I want to do at a professional level. And so building your investment thesis is very important, like knowing what you're looking for, what matters to you. And there's so many different, factors that you can consider along the way. So the things that I gravitated towards are things that I think are, I guess somewhat future-proof. As many people say, it's all about the founder. It's all about the founding team. And certainly once you're actually meeting with startups and founders with the idea of putting your money into their business, you get a lot more tuned into that. It's all kind of like theoretical until you're doing it and you're ready to put skin in the game. But you focus on the founder that you think is going to really succeed, and so that's a key piece of the thesis as well. I also care about making an impact. So I mean, I'll be honest, there are some companies that are generating great revenue and they're in some sort of data brokerage or something like that, and it's okay, wonderful business. I have nothing against that, but it's not for me. I want to put my money into something that is going to make some difference. So found myself gravitating towards companies that are in agri-tech, that are in health tech, that are in med tech, things that I think are going to help the world and hopefully also have a bigger place in the future.
Were there any aha moments in the program or something exciting or completely unexpected that happened?
Yeah, actually, so one of the things that actually, I'll kind of rewind a little bit. As I was thinking about joining this program, there were a couple of concerns I had. One, I was worried that the quality of the startups wasn't going to be great. And I was thinking, well, if I'm if I'm committing here to put money into the winner of this competition, what if I don't believe in it, right? And so I was a little bit worried about that. And I was also worried that there was going to be a bit of groupthink. I mean, we are all, many of the people joining first-time angel investors, so we're still learning. And I thought, well, if people aren't experts at investing, maybe not even experts in technology or any related industries, what's going to be the sort of thought process of the group, right? But one of the things that was eye-opening is that actually so many people who were part of the group brought such great energy and knowledge and expertise. And so you're really able to leverage all this expertise in evaluating all of these different startups. And then even beyond the quality of the investing group, the quality of the startups really blew my mind. I was amazed at how good these startups were and how good the deal flow was that you brought. And so, that was great. But to now answer your question about what was the aha moment, we got down to 12 semifinalists in the program, and we had to vote from 12 down to 6. I had at the time 3 favorites, and actually kind of to my own surprise, all 3 of those favorite got voted out in the semifinal stage. I thought, oh my God. And I mean, it just kind of shows the embarrassment of riches we had. We had all of these great companies to evaluate and choose from, but I was bummed that, my favorites got voted out. And so I sort of had decided that I was quite interested in these companies and I wanted to at least continue the conversation. I wanted to do more due diligence. So I reached out to each of those founders and I said, hey, I'm sorry that you got voted out, but I'm personally interested in continuing the conversation, and I do believe that other investors who are part of this program would also be interested. All 3 of them were very, very happy to continue the conversation, and so at that point I started to kind of work closely and do due diligence with at least 2 of those startups that I wanted to pursue. And that was really eye-opening for me because I got to get much more in-depth with the founder. I got to coordinate a smaller subset of the group of investors, and I really enjoyed that process. I found it very rewarding. I learned so much more about the founders, and so taking that not just active but extra active approach, I found great.
You took the lead investor role on those startups, which is highly recommended and also very much needed in the ecosystem. If you didn't step in and do the extra due diligence and bring those startups to the attention of all the other investors, they wouldn't get the extra tickets. And just by being active, you got 2 startups, an extra quite significant amount of investment going to them, right?
Yeah. We had, I think, ultimately 10 or 12 of the group of investors. So maybe a third of the group decided to invest in at least one of those two startups. So yeah, it was great, you know.
But how did you feel about the finalists? And because were you also happy with the startup that got chosen as the winner, and did you see that it made sense, and like was it justified for you at the end, like that after the time passed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of the winner of the competition. So I mean that winner was Calla Lilly, as many people know. You know, it's a med tech company, a drug delivery device, pivoted from a consumer product to, you know, drug delivery. And extremely promising. I mean, so they were also one of my favorites, and I'm very, very glad to be an investor in that company now. You know, one of the things that's amazing about also angel investing is that you can go in sort of areas where traditional VC is a little bit hesitant to go. Mm-hmm. And one of those areas is medtech. You know, because of the timeline of biotech and medtech getting regulatory approval and so on, they almost have to have like this magic window of being right at the right time and meeting right with the right type of investor that wants to specialize in that field right when that VC is like putting money in. Because otherwise the sort of like 5 years in, 5 years out VC model, the timing just doesn't work because they probably need to see returns within 5 years, and medtech very rarely has returns within 5 years. And so that's why some of these companies, even though they're incredibly promising, they're not going to traditional VC. They're going to angel investors. And so in a way, we have an opportunity to put money into companies that, you know, we're the only ones that get this opportunity. So that's great as well.
So is that now your focus? Is it what excites you moving forward into the ecosystem, or will you keep a broader mind and invest diversely into the ecosystem?
Yeah, I want to stay diverse. I mean, I think very much of myself as a generalist investor, so I don't want to specialize too much. And frankly, if I did specialize, I would have to go into like my own history of work, which is, you know, technology startups, specifically fintech more than anything else. And I do love fintech, but I don't want to only invest in fintech. I think also another interesting thing about being a generalist and being an angel investor is that as you build a portfolio of 10 or 20 companies, you know, it's a little bit it's a risk mitigation to not be too focused on one thing or another, right? Because everything's cyclical, and sometimes certain industries go up, others go down, and if you have a generalist approach, you can kind of ride through those waves.
Absolutely. So building a broad portfolio and staying open to see what else is really coming out instead of being narrow-minded, that fits perfectly. So how are you engaging differently? If you are engaging differently in the ecosystem, are you investing with any of the alumni investors? Are you engaged in the network? How does that change your participation style or participation in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the great things, I mean, as I mentioned, like it's such a great investment group. And so some of the, you know, one of the greatest benefits of the program is like building that network and even building friendships from the program. And so those friendships are great. And I've been communicating with them, meeting with them. You know, some of us are discussing some kind of like more professional approach or some next stage of how we can, you know, level up our angel investing game.
I'm so excited to hear that. It's one of our focuses to create community and just help everyone else step into the angel investing and hopefully make friends and start something new. That really makes me happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's one of the best things about the program. So absolutely doing that. You know, one of the things I did is I switched, you know, my LinkedIn headline to include investor. And as soon as you do that, you do start to get a lot of cold pitches from startups. But what's amazing is that even from those pitches and from those messages you start to get on LinkedIn, I've met with several, you know, I would say probably a dozen different startups online. And then those within the ecosystem here in Barcelona, I've started to meet with some of those startup founders locally as well. And so, yeah, you know, just it takes time, of course, but building up that network, building up that momentum is very enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully the overall ecosystem brings you more of what you're looking for and creates a space for you to have a platform to announce or share what you're interested in, to even, you know, create a butterfly effect and create a bigger circle around you.
Yeah, I very much hope so, yeah.
So now looking back at like how was the program and your engagement a second time around, if you were to do the program, what would you do differently? or what would you advise people to pay attention to when they are joining the next program?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I am coming back, right? So I'll be the lead investor of TAC 7, Transatlantic Angel Conference, Edition 7. But yeah, I would say that what I would do differently and what I would recommend to anybody coming into the program now is to really, put a lot of effort in the beginning stages. So it can be a bit overwhelming. You're learning, but you have to evaluate, really 70 potential companies that you want to look at. And so being able to pretty thoroughly review those pitch decks, take a little bit of notes, because you're going to have an opportunity to meet those founders when they start to pitch, and having some questions lined up, what are you not sure about with their pitch. Having some questions really makes those interactions much more valuable. And I would say that the other thing is that doing a little bit of background research, understanding the basics is very important. And so there are resources out there. I mean, there are books like Angel Investing, but there are also resources online. So just learning a little bit about the process. The more knowledgeable you'll be, and the more prepared you'll be.
Absolutely. And also I see this thing when everyone comes back a second time around, they already have enjoyed the process from the beginning so much more because they know a little bit more, so they feel a bit more ready to ask those questions and engage with the startup without the hesitation or fear of being irrelevant or stepping outside of the line, or which there are no lines, learning program.
Yeah, there are no rules, right? I mean, you can ask any questions that come to mind, and I think that open-mindedness is another important trait for investors coming in.
Exactly, and learning that it's okay to ask those questions, and they're very important. Everyone starts from a very different place, so a tech company, for example, for someone to understand, depending on your background, you need to ask different questions, and all of them are relevant because at the end of the day, we are angel investors, and it's our personal investment, so we need to understand, not that the information is just communicated and that's it. Yeah. Do you have any final reflections about angel investing or about the overall ecosystem here?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's a big question. So I would say that another thing that's on my mind is that I do think a lot of things are changing right now in startups and in technology in general. I mean, of course, AI is such a big thing now. And the cost of creating a startup is going to be exponentially lower than it used to be. I think that teams are going to be exponentially smaller than they used to be. And I think the small teams are going to be able to scale up and create big, very, very successful companies. And what that means for angel investing, of course, is that I think that these startups are not necessarily going to need later stage VC funding. I think that the number of startups that even become wildly successful can bypass Series A. They won't even go into that because they'll already be able to reach profitability at a very low cost. And so really, I think that angel investing may be increasingly the only way to invest in a lot of startups. And so I think that now is the time to consider becoming an angel investor. I also think that it's very, very eye-opening and a learning experience for founders as well. I mean, having been on the founder side and on the startup side, I've, as I mentioned, prepared startup pitch decks in the past, but then once you're on the other side of the table, you have a completely different mindset about it. And so for founders, I think you can also become an angel investor, especially with small ticket sizes, and just gain that experience and that knowledge of what it's like to hear pitches, what it's like to put your own money into another startup. I think it sharpens your ability as a founder as well.
Absolutely, and it changes your perspective and expectations from an investor because you can feel them, and if you understand what are their fears, what's going through their mind, you can definitely connect with them better and speak the same language more or less.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mike. This was Startup Investor Accelerator's interview sessions with angel investors.